Today I want to talk about branding. There's so much misinformation about branding out there that I just felt like we need to do a session where we really talk about what it is, what it isn't, why it matters to you. If you're a church or you're a nonprofit or you're a ministry organization in particular, how branding applies to you. Years and years ago, I wrote a book called Branding Faith, Why Some Churches and Nonprofits Impact Culture and Others Don't. And when I wrote Branding Faith, it was the first time people had really started talking about branding in the context of a church or a ministry. I'd done it for years. I'd worked with many of the largest churches and ministry organizations in the United States, particularly media ministries, in helping them understand how to position themselves in the marketplace, how to understand what branding meant. And I finally put it into a book. And it was controversial at the time. There were a lot of church leaders that at the time just weren't sure about this whole idea of branding. They were afraid it's going to turn us into some kind of a celebrity-driven pastor. It's going to make us into a secular company. But the truth is, branding is just positioning. You could call it positioning or discovering your purpose. And so Branding Faith was the first book I wrote. A number of years later, I took that and updated it. When I wrote Branding Faith, there was no such thing as social media. There wasn't a lot of the options we have on the web these days, short videos, things like that. And so I updated it a number of years later into a newer book called Unique, Telling Your Story in the Age of Brands and Social Media. So the core of Branding Faith is still in Unique, but I've also added it and expanded it to include social media and all the things we can do online these days to help in positioning your organization. And I would encourage you, if you want to go deep, if you want to do a deep dive and really understand how branding, how positioning, how discovering your purpose can make a difference for your church, your ministry, your organization, your cause, this is the book to get. And so, and what's funny is when I first wrote Branding Faith, when I first started teaching about this, I was kind of a lone voice out there. There weren't many people talking about these kind of issues. And at the time it was controversial. But now, I guess, to the success of this and to the success of getting this conversation going out there, there are literally hundreds of organizations that are focused on branding churches and branding ministries. Sometimes they go incredibly overboard. I got a call recently from a major ministry, very large ministry here in the United States, that said, we just did a branding study. We hired a company to do a big branding study for our organization. We spent $150,000 and we've got a 2,000-page document and we don't have any clue what to do with it. What do we do? And I said, well, number one, you got ripped off. You got ripped off because branding is not a religion. It's not something that is so encompassing and so huge that it diverts the course of what you do. Branding, simply put, is how to distinguish yourself in the marketplace, how to discover who you really are in this competitive world that we live in, and how to get noticed. That's why I called my book Unique. How to make yourself unique and how to get your voice heard. My feeling is if God's called you to impact culture today, if God's called you for evangelism or building homeless shelters or working with the needy or whatever cause or mission God's called you to, you need to get that voice heard. People need to know about it. If nobody knows what you're doing, you've failed. And so branding and positioning becomes very, very important because essentially what branding is people's perception of you. Honestly, we can't create that perception because it's in other people's mind. One of the ways when I give lectures and talk about it and teach about it, I always show the example of what do people think of when they think of you? That's in a great part what branding is. Some people call it a promise that we make to our donors or the recipients of our services or our customers, depending on what kind of an organization you happen to be. It's a promise, but it's also a perception. What do people think of when they think of you? And that's incredibly important. Why? Because today we live in an incredibly cluttered culture. There's two big reasons, I think, for branding. One is you want to establish an emotional connection with your audience, whoever that audience may be. As I say, it may be donors, it may be customers, it may be church members, it may be people in your community. An emotional connection is important. For instance, when it comes to cars, when it comes to safety, you always think of Volvo. Volvo has built their brand around the concept of safety. When it comes to motorcycles and you think of Harley Davidson, it's all about the outlaw biker. It's the freedom of the road. It's that wide open, I'm going to explore new places. It's that tough guy image that's been really reiterated so much in movies and in advertising over the years for Harley Davidson. When you think of airlines and you think of fun here in the United States, you think of Southwest. They're low cost, they're low key, they're relaxed, they're fun. Every great company out there has a brand persona. And that often establishes an emotional connection with the audience, so that when they think of fun, or they think of the open road, or they think of individualism, or they think of safety, your product happens to be what they think about. So the question is, what kind of an emotional connection are you making with people that you serve, people that help support you, or the general public? The other thing I think that's even a bigger reason for the need for branding is we live in an incredibly cluttered culture. Let me give you some examples. When you read 7 days of a daily newspaper, you've read more information than most people just 100 years ago read during their entire lifetime. Think about that. 7 days of a daily newspaper is more information than most people just 100 years ago read during their entire lifetime. We're being overwhelmed today, and that doesn't count the cable channels. That doesn't count the online resources. That doesn't count websites and social media options that we're being overwhelmed with today. That clutter is absolutely overwhelming. So how do you punch through? How do you stand out in that world? I was thinking about YouTube the other day, and I realized that every minute, more than 60 hours of video are being uploaded to YouTube. Every minute. So in that world of clutter, in that world of hyper competition, how do you get your voice noticed? How do you get your mission noticed? How do you get your cause noticed? And remember, it's not about ego. It's not about ego. It's becoming distinctive. Back in the 90s, there was a decisive moment in Apple Computer. Steve Jobs realized that they'd kind of hit a lid. At that point, they were just making computers. They were making laptops, and they were making desktop computers. And he brought the team in one day, and he said, I realized that we've drifted away from the basics, and we've decided to focus on just 30% of what we do. In other words, they ditched 70% of what they were doing out there. They didn't want to be a company that just made boxes, that made computers. They wanted to be a company that had an impact on the world. So he asked an incredibly profound question. Who is Apple, and where do we fit into this world? That's what started them on the road to becoming the global company. Just recently, they were the first $1 trillion company in the history of business. So obviously, asking that question completely changed the direction of what they were doing. And let me give you some of the other questions he asked that day when he had his team around him. He asked questions like, what drives us every day? What makes our heart sing? How do we help our customers achieve their dreams? What is our core value? Value, singular. What do we stand for? And finally, what is our place in the world? And when Steve Jobs started asking those questions, it really helped them focus on becoming a company that didn't just make computers, but a company that actually impacted the world, that he later said made a dent in the universe. So the question is, how many churches do that? How many nonprofit organizations do that? How many Christian ministries do that, where they really ask those tough questions about why I am here, what's my purpose, what's our mission, and how do we get that story out there in a more significant way? So in a world where we're being bombarded with 5,000, 6,000 media messages every single day. I went to a service station the other day to get my gas, and there's a video monitor embedded in the service station, in the pump, playing TV commercials there. I mean, literally, we can't escape this media bombardment out there. So in that world, how do you stand out? And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you need to start thinking about. This is not going to go in depth. We don't have time. We'll do other episodes later. But I think that right now, I want to just give you some points that you need to consider about why my brand matters and how I can make it stronger, build it up, so it's actually noticed and it stands out there in the marketplace. And by the way, let me say, many secular companies have what they call a brand statement. A brand statement isn't something you see in advertising, but it's something internal that drives what they do. Nike, I use that example a lot. Their brand statement is the spirit of the athlete. You don't ever see that in advertising. It's not on their boxes or their print ads, their website. They use taglines like "just do it" for their advertising. But the idea of the spirit of the athlete drives everything they do internally. In other words, that's the reason when it comes to Nike, you don't see a Nike commercial where they talk about the quality of rubber on their shoes or how easy they are to lace up. Any of those technical issues, they never talk about. They focus on how you feel when you put them on. They want you to be like Kobe or be like LeBron or be like Mike. They want to elevate the way you think about sport. And that's the way they focus, and that's what sets them apart. Keep in mind that when some of their new shoes came out, I remember a few years ago, one of the new models came out, and it was in November. And that particular November, it was in incredibly brutally cold weather, certainly here in the United States. But in cities like New York and Philadelphia and Chicago, young boys lined up for a week in the snow, in tents, in sleeping bags, in the snow, outside the store, just to be first to get their hands on those shoes. Now, the critics said they were good shoes, but they weren't spectacular shoes. I mean, they weren't anything that would make you stand in a blizzard for a week to get. But they didn't realize that those boys weren't just buying shoes, they were buying the story that surrounds those shoes. So my question to you is, what's the story that surrounds your church? What's the story that surrounds your ministry, your cause, your project, your outreach? And trust me, everything has a story. We all have a story. I have a story. You have a story. Your church has a story. The ice cream store down the street has a story. The high school in your community has a story. In other words, I go back to, what do people think of when they think of you? We need to do everything we can to build up that story, to make it unique, to make it different, and most important, to make it stand out. So when they have a need in their life, when they're searching for God, or they're searching or struggling for whatever it is you offer, I want you to come up. I want you to be the first thing in their mind. Because remember, we don't like to think we're in competition, particularly in the Christian world or with churches or other ministries. But the truth is, there are many, many, many churches in your city. Why should somebody come to yours? There are many, many outreaches. No matter what you do, you have others that do what you do. Why should people support your vision? Why should people come to you for help? So standing out, positioning yourself in a unique way is so vitally important. So let me give you an idea. When you start thinking about your story, your brand, the way you're positioned in the marketplace, here's some things we need to think about. First of all, we need to get on the radar. Visibility is important. In fact, in a media-driven culture where we're being bombarded with competing messages, visibility is just as important as ability. In other words, and many people will disagree with me, but let me say, I don't care how great you are at doing what God's called you to do. If nobody knows about it, you failed. If nobody knows about it, you failed. We have to get on the radar, and trust me, it's more important than ever. My dad was a pastor back in the 60s in North Carolina, in the American South. And in those days, if you could preach, if you had a good Bible and a car and could get to places, you could stand out. You could start a real vital ministry. Today, there's so much competition, so much clutter, so much other voices out there. It takes a lot more to get that voice heard. So understand that visibility matters. Doesn't mean you become an egomaniac trying to get heard, trying to get seen, trying to get your voice out there. But it does mean you have to make an effort. You have to be intentional about getting your message heard. Another thing to think about is everything communicates. In a digital culture, everything communicates. For instance, your website communicates a message. Your reception area communicates a message. The lobby of your church communicates a message. The car you drive communicates a message. Your business card communicates a message. And trust me, this generation understands how to get their story, how to get that message from everything they see. I'll give you a great example. I saw a study about a year ago that came out that said that when you meet someone for the first time, you decide what you think of that person in the first 4 to 8 seconds. Now think about this. You haven't had time to really get to know them. You haven't had time to even hardly meet them, but we're being pulled in so many directions today. We have so many other things to do and so many other options that we've just changed our behavior where we start deciding what we think about people in the first 4 to 8 seconds after we meet them. Now, I've studied this, and I've discovered it's true of experiences, products. This extrapolates to a lot of different things. So I'm glad your sermon is anointed. I'm glad your worship service is fantastic. But in an 8-second world, who's the first person a new visitor meets when they walk in the door? In an 8-second world, what does your lobby look like? In an 8-second world, those first impressions matter more than ever. In an 8-second world, think about it. In fact, I've discovered that today in this digital world we live in, virtually 100% of new visitors will check you out online before they come to your church. Now, in some parts of the world, we haven't caught up to that yet, but trust me, it's coming. Virtually 100% of new visitors will check you out online before they come. So why is your website so terrible? I'll tell you, in a world today where your website could be the most important factor in helping someone decide whether or not to visit your church or whether or not to donate to your organization, your website should be amazing. Your website should be really inviting and help them achieve the information or find the information they want. So understand that everything communicates. So the thing I'd encourage you to do is go back, look at every expression of your ministry, from your business cards to your websites to brochures that you put in the church lobby, to the lobby, the reception area when visitors come into your office. What are those areas of what I'd call first impressions that you need to tweak, that you need to fix? in order to change what's being communicated about you or your ministry. The third thing I'd say is, in a digital culture, people are unforgiving. I'll tell you, if you've been involved in social media very long, if you've had websites very long, if you write a blog very long, you understand that you are going to get critics. The fact is that in an email, instant message, text messaging world, word travels fast, which means we need to think about our reputation, we need to think about our integrity, because one mistake travels around the world quicker than a lifetime of ministry can, because word travels fast online. I mean, I think that we should start thinking about Google. You know, we always think about Google in terms of search. Maybe we should start thinking about Google in terms of reputation management. Are people being critical of your church? Look at sites like Yelp and other sites, and there's different sites in different countries around the world, but they're evaluation sites. People now will go online and evaluate your church. Have you seen that? Have you checked it out? What are people saying about your church or your ministry or your nonprofit organization? That's really, really important. And the truth is, what goes online just doesn't go away. I had a pastor friend that before he became a Christian, he was in college and he got arrested for drunk driving. Well, guess what? For the rest of his life, you can Google that and it will show up on the web. He can't escape from that. So the truth is, everything that appears online really doesn't go away. So in a digital world, we have to understand that that world is unforgiving. There are more critics than ever. I've discovered in America that if your church is doing something significant, if it's really doing something important, you're going to get critics. You're going to get critics online. I know one church in Dallas that has a critic that created a blog just for the purpose of criticizing the church. Another church here in the West that no matter what they do, there's a guy who's taken out a Facebook page, and every week he criticizes that church on Facebook. So understand that world, and that's another reason pastors and church leaders have to become web savvy. We need to understand how the internet works, how social media works, so we can deal with that kind of criticism. A couple other quick things that I think are important. Understand the power of a name. In an 8-second world, your name is the first thing people see. So what's your church name? What's your ministry name? What's the name of your new project or your new book? Names matter more than ever because that's the first thing people see. And in an 8-second world, it could be what they decide, whether they decide to buy it or not, whether they decide to attend, whether they decide to give. Trust me, many people that are watching this may be older and may just be skeptical or frustrated about it. But the truth is, I can tell you, people are deciding more than ever, which means names matter. Companies today spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to search and find out a proper name for their new medicine or their new project or their new product. So names do matter. They understand that in a digital culture where things happen fast, names matter more than ever. And trust me, churches are terrible about names. Our company, Cooke Pictures, we get called in for a number of branding conversations with people. In fact, we've led a number of branding initiatives with churches and ministries across the United States. And one of the issues that we struggle with the most is names. We have an entire process, in fact, that we've created to help churches walk through a process of coming up with a new name. Number one, First Baptist Church or First Presbyterian Church doesn't mean much to this culture anymore. We have to have a name that connects with people, that resonates, so they will start thinking about, well, maybe I should attend that place. Also, there's a million, whatever name you pick, there's going to be a lot of others out there. So now more than ever, it's a struggle to figure out what name is unique and different for our church that helps separate us from everybody else. So the bottom line is, we know from experience, our team at Cooke Pictures, that walking through a branding process with a church or a ministry or a nonprofit, or walking through a name change process, is an incredibly important, challenging, but incredibly important process. So understand that the power of a name becomes very, very important. And by the way, don't ever tell me names don't matter. In the United States, there was a college in Grand Rapids, Michigan, been around for over 100 years, a highly respected school. It was originally called Grand Rapids Baptist Bible College. Well, years later, they decided to drop Baptist from their name, so they became Grand Rapids Bible College. And that was fine, and it worked for years and years and years. Highly respected faculty, highly respected graduates, good school. But a number of years ago, they decided to take a much bolder step. They went from Grand Rapids Bible College to Cornerstone University. That's all they changed. They didn't change the faculty. They didn't change the curriculum, the funding, the buildings, nothing. They just went from Grand Rapids Bible College to Cornerstone University. In 1 year, enrollment doubled. just by changing the name. After all, going to Grand Rapids Bible College may not sound very interesting, but going to Cornerstone University sounds awesome. Always understand in today's culture the power of a name. It's incredibly important. So let me give you just one or two other quick little things that I think are important in this digital age when it comes to deciding your brand. Number 5 that I would say is understand and speak the language of design. This is the most design-driven generation in history. Young people today respond to really strong, really good design. Take the time to hire a professional. Get a good designer, a graphic designer, to do your logo, to do your designs, even when it comes to your church lobby or Sunday school rooms or your sanctuary. Design matters to this generation. That doesn't mean the gospel doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be preaching the gospel. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing authentic, real work for the kingdom. But the truth is, our goal is to get them in the door. Our goal is to be a net that captures people's attention. You're never going to reach them with the gospel unless you start thinking about your perception and what they first think of you, because they'll never walk in the door to a church they don't understand, they don't like, doesn't sound interesting. So we need to think about what are these ways that will get the attention of a new generation and bring them in. And one thing I'll say is don't dumb down your design because your donors or many of your congregation are older. I'll tell you, older people love good design as well. Apple, one of the fastest growing markets here in the United States for iPhones are senior citizens. And yet you never see a commercial for Apple with an old guy on his walker listening to his iPhone, because they understand old people want to be cool too. And so they've learned not to dumb down their design. They put their design out there like a standard to shoot for. So always remember, and I've had this argument over and over with ministries, design, and they say, damn, Phil, we need to slow it down. We don't want to be too contemporary, too hip. A lot of our donors are older. A lot of our customers are older. A lot of our people we're reaching out to are older. Congregation is older. No. In every case, I've discovered that the minute we make the design more hip, more contemporary, more cutting edge, older people love it as well. You just need to embrace them and make them part of the process. So these are just kind of things to think about. I'd also just throw in at the last minute here, take social media seriously. You know, when it comes to branding and perception out there, the image that we present on social media really does matter. It may not be a tool you use for fundraising. It may not be a tool you use to grow your church in a lot of ways, but trust me, social media is powerful for mobilizing people, for getting your message out in a powerful way. I think it's a very important tool for this generation. So the bottom line is this: whatever your budget, whatever your goals, whatever your vision, whatever your size, branding, thinking about how we position ourselves out there in the community, in the marketplace, or whatever place we minister, how we're perceived by other people out there, all these questions are incredibly, incredibly important. I think that one of the greatest challenges in ministry today is getting your voice heard. The stakes are high. Let me tell you, we are a culture today that's not going in the right direction. And I want your message, your calling, your voice to be heard out there. I would just probably, say this: don't give your audience, your congregation, your donors what you think they want. Give them what they never dreamed possible. So let me remind you that my book, Unique, Telling Your Story in the Age of Brands and Social Media. If you want the full story, if you want to go deep, this is the book to get. I think it should be on the desk of every pastor in America, every media leader, every communications director at every church or ministry in America, because it'll really force you to start asking the questions that will help you understand how to position your organization. And if you have other questions, call us. Our website is cookepictures.com, COOKEPICTURES.com, Cooke Pictures. Our team leads branding initiatives for big ministries, churches. We'd love to help you. We'd love to walk you through the process. If you have questions about positioning your organization, your ministry, your nonprofit, your church, or you want to go through this name process, this name change process I talked about a minute ago, we'd love to help. So reach out to us. And my blog is philcooke.com, PHILCOOKE.com. I write about these issues all the time. You can subscribe to a weekly newsletter where you're getting the top blog posts, and if you do that, I'll send you a free ebook on creativity. I'd love for you to start thinking about these questions because it's so incredibly important. The last word I'd tell you is don't give your audience, customers, or congregation what you think they want. Start giving them what they never dreamed. Thanks a lot for tuning in. And we'll continue this conversation on branding in some other episodes and some other podcasts, because this is so critically important to the future of your organization.